They're not net. The Sorrells were among Savannah's most influential families. Francis Sorrell was a West Indian plantation owner who became one of Savannah's wealthiest men. Francis was born in Saint Domingue, also known as Haiti. A slave revolt forced his family to flee, and the young Francis was saved by slaves who refused to take the life of a young boy. He made a living working the docks in Port-au-Prince and was eventually transferred by his company to the U.S. Despite being saved by slaves, he himself eventually became a slave trader. Francis and his associates opened up a shipping company in Savannah, where they shipped salt, butter, molasses, cotton, and African slaves. The company grew exponentially, making Sorrell a very, very wealthy man. Moxie Sorrell was Francis's son. Moxley fought for the Confederates in the Civil War and rose to the ranks of brigadier general. He fought in the siege of Fort Pulaski, where Union forces overwhelmed the Confederates and took the fort. The Sorrell Weed House is among one of Savannah's most famous buildings, haunted or otherwise. The house was built in 1837 by architect Charles Klutsky. In the mid-20th century, it became one of the earliest homes to be restored in the city's preservation movement. The Historic Savannah Foundation made the Sorrell Weed House their first public exhibit, which they used to showcase their restoration work. It was also one of the first homes to be made into a historic landmark by the state of Georgia. The Sorrell Weed House gained fame after making several appearances in movies and TV. The building was featured in the opening scenes of Forrest Gump. The scene was shot from the roof of the Sorrell Weed House and shows Madison Square and the surrounding vicinity. The house has also appeared in the Today Show, as well as several ghost-themed TV shows such as Ghost Hunters, Ghost Adventures, and the Travel Channel's Most Terrifying Places in America. Francis Sorrell married Lucinda Moxley soon after arriving in the United States. Lucinda was from a wealthy family who did business with Francis. Lucinda died just a few years after they married, so Francis, the classy man that he is, then married Lucinda's younger sister, Matilda. The two had a happy marriage, but Francis was well known for his vices and other things. He began having an affair with one of his slaves named Molly. Francis even gave Molly her own room just so he could have his disgusting private affair with her. But it wasn't enough. Matilda found out about Molly. Distraught and enraged, Matilda committed suicide by jumping off the second-floor balcony. She landed head first, cracking her skull upon the floor of the concrete courtyard. Molly the slave was struck by guilt. Being a slave, she would be held liable for the affair and, subsequently, the death. Molly was found hanging by a noose in an apparent suicide. The Sorrell Weed House sits on the Madison Square. The area was the site of a vicious battle during the American Revolutionary War, known as the Siege of Savannah. Joint American and French forces attempted to push the British out of Savannah, who had taken the city just a year earlier. The Revolutionary Army was outmanned and outgunned. Bodies were piling up. The revolutionaries dug a trench at Madison Square to bury their dead. Hundreds of soldiers died in the span of a few weeks. In the heat of the battle, the dead and injured couldn't be differentiated. Sick and injured soldiers were thrown into the pit with the dead and were often buried alive. After the battle, the bodies were never exhumed, and the city continued to expand around the old battlefield. Madison Square and the surrounding areas were built in the 1830s, 50 years after the war. Many of the buildings, including the Sorrell Weed House, are built over the remains of the dead soldiers. The Sorrell Weed House is not only among the most haunted in Savannah, it's one of the most well-known haunted houses in the world. The strange haunts and horrifying history has brought quite a bit of attention to the Sorrell Weed House. As a result, the building has become the subject of several paranormal investigations.